Okay, it looks like we got 21 people in here. So we are going to kick things off. Welcome everybody to the second Premiere Pro user group online meeting. I am Eric Addison, for those of you who don't know, and DJ's here, our presenter Jason's here, and I'm broadcasting from my office, the edit bay here at 100 Acre Films. And so I'm just going to make a quick few announcements, and then I'm going to hand it over to DJ, who's going to introduce Jason, and then we're going to get started. For those of you who haven't heard, there's a new version of Premiere. Actually, I think it's a new version of everything, right, DJ? Yep. So new version of Premiere, new version of After Effects. The big thing for 14.1 is production or productions, which is just a new way to organize your projects. And to set things up. And we will possibly be talking about that next month or the month after that. We're gonna have to kind of wait and see. We kind of had a presenter, we talked about having a presenter present in May, but if she's not available with everything that's going on, we will cover productions. But it is a short version of the story is it's just a new way to organize your projects. It uses the project files, but it sort of works a lot like bins in Avid, if you're familiar with that. So we will dive into more on that and why that's kind of a cool thing for your projects. There is a chat. Is it set up for just 3 people to see on the screen? Just wanted to confirm. Yes. That is, thank you, Brian, for bringing that up. Yes, we are just doing the 3 people on the screen this time. We're going to try this and see how it works. If everybody hates it, we will go back to the other way next time. But we're going to give this one a go. So you can ask questions via the chat pod. DJ and I will be watching that, and we will ask Jason, we'll pass those questions along to Jason as they come in. So I think that is all the stuff I have. Yes, Bill, you are coming through. Mm-hmm. I see your comment there. So with that, I'm going to get the Facebook Live going here so I can monitor the comments there. And oh, okay, I'll find it there later. All right, DJ, do you want to introduce Jason?
Sure. This is so weird because this is me looking at you guys and this is me not. So anyway, so Jason is a friend of mine and Eric's. We've known him for probably 4 years ago. It seemed like we met. It's been a while. Yeah. And anyway, so Jason's a professional colorist, finishing artist, and post-production workflow engineer based in LA. We've been trying to get him for a while. And, being in LA, we're in San Diego, that's always a little difficult. But luckily, this pandemic happened. Jason's passion for storytelling using light, shadow, and color is evident in his work. It spans the gamut of commercial projects for clients like Adobe and Google, independent films bound for the festival circuit, and immersive VR experiences all around the globe. So Jason runs Pixel Tools, which is a company dedicated, they improve color grading processes, workflow, and he makes it faster, easier, and just more approachable because color, that world needs that because that's why we're having this meeting. He's a Blackmagic design certified trainer and has published content for companies such as Mixing Light, Frame.io, Ripple Training, Boris FX, and Digital Anarchy. He is the lead post-production workflow engineer for the Broadcast and OTT Network, the Africa channel, and he's a member of the organization representing colorists, the Colorist Society International. And he's quite a dashing fellow, as I have learned today, because this is the first time we've semi-met. So here we go.
We work together, but
yeah, work together. And
DJ doesn't say too many people are dashing, by the way, so you should take that as a compliment, Jason.
Yeah,
thank you very much for the compliment.
When it comes to most things. All right, to Jason.
And thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate you guys having me on. I know it's been a little while. We've been trying to make this happen, and yeah, with the pandemic, it sure makes traffic a lot easier to make it down to San Diego with you guys. So today I figured that I would do something a little bit more casual. I know typically with user groups, we're doing a lot of PowerPoint presentations. We're going through the process of color grading and everything. But I figured today that everybody's at home. I'm at home. I'm in my suite here. That I figured that I would just sort of walk you through a couple things with color grading. And being that this is an Adobe user group, I didn't want to make anything application specific. So I'm going to go through a couple of different applications here. So we're going to start in Adobe Premiere Pro, and we're going to play around with the Lumetric color panel. I'm sure you guys are pretty familiar with that. But we're going to take a look at not just using the panels, but how we can use it properly with the footage in terms of not only just color correcting the footage, but color grading it in terms of taking the client's full views into account. So a lot of the times it's really easy to get caught up in the technical nuance of where are we trying to get the waveforms balanced and all that fun stuff, but you end up forgetting what the client's purpose is. Are they trying to tell a story? Are they trying to tell a product or sell a product? Are they trying to just make it look cool? And all of a sudden, when you render it out after 8 hours of grading and they give you 100 notes, you're really hurt and you're wondering what's going on? Why don't they like that? And unfortunately, if you get caught up too technically, it's really easy to do that. So I was gonna just walk you through my process today and figure out show you guys how I go through the color grading process from start to finish. Now, real quick, I lost video on both DJ and Eric. Do you guys still hear me and see me?
We're
Yes,
here.
we're still here.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So we'll do this just blind a little bit. So I'm going to switch over to the output on my Blackmagic card so we can see what's coming out of my monitor. Swap over. Okay. Can you see the Premiere?
Gotcha.
Excellent. Okay. So right here, I'm going to start with the Pixel Tools Power Grade promo. Now, this is one of the products that I made for DaVinci Resolve. It's basically a bunch of presets for Blackmagic DaVinci Resolve, and I'll show you this a little bit later. But one of the reasons I wanted to jump into this first is it has a lot of fun clips with a lot of potential. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of potential to bring out some really cool colors and textures in the grading process. So let me jump in. I'll show you real quick just what the final is so you can see what we had in the end. Let me go to the copy here. And if I play this back real quick, and I don't think you guys are hearing this, so let me see if I can reroute this through.
Yes, you're correct. We did not hear that.
Okay, 1 second. Let me reroute everything through the correct audio. No, I'm not getting that either. Okay, well, this is color grading, so we're not too concerned about audio.
Audio is another presentation. This is color grading.
Exactly. We can jump into Audition another time. So what you can see here is the before and after grades. We're starting, most of this is shot on red or, either red or DJI drones. And most of this was graded in Resolve. And we're basically just pushing this footage. I really just wanted to grade this footage as much as I could. This is a promotion for a color grading product. So I'm really trying to rip every single bit of both color and texture out of this footage that I can. So I was using the presets that I created in DaVinci Resolve, but I'm going to show you that I use a lot of tweaks and tricks to really sort of pull out the focus in this footage. So I'm going to let it go for one more second. And then we're going to jump in and we're going to grade these clips again in Adobe Premiere and see what we can use right into Adobe Premiere, because a lot of people don't necessarily want to go over to DaVinci Resolve, and I don't blame them. You have to round trip between the applications, you need to conform, and especially for smaller projects, that can be a lot of time wasted, especially if you need to get that out the door today at the end of the day and you've already spent the entire day especially editing it and doing audio work, and you just barely have time to do the color grade. Doing a conform to get it over to Resolve and dealing with those problems can literally break the budget or break the time budget, either one of those. So let's see, and let's jump into the Lumetri color panel and show you that the color tools inside Adobe Premiere, while very different from DaVinci Resolve, are absolutely not dull or lackluster in any way. They're just very different. Now, let's start right here, and we'll start on this first clip right here. Now, I know this is a DJI-based camera, but before I even go in, I want to talk about a couple things based in Premiere, because one of the things that I hear a lot about people that go back and forth between Resolve is they want to make either program act like the other one. They want to make Resolve act like Premiere, or they want to make Premiere act like Resolve. And personally, I think that's the wrong way to go about that. You could get the applications to act like the other one, but really you're trying to make a square peg go in a round hole, or vice versa. And you're really going to be fighting the application the whole way through the process. What I mean by that is DaVinci Resolve, as you'll see later, is very much a tool-based application. You have the different pages, and then you have the tools that are set there. Whereas Adobe Premiere has these different panels. And unlike Resolve, you can move these panels around. You can customize it as much as you want. You have these different, we have the color workspace. I can move this over here. I'm going to leave this right here right now. But it's set in a way that you can apply effects to clips. I can apply the Lumetri color effect. I can apply a Red Giant Universe color effect. I can do a variety of different things. And that's not how DaVinci Resolve works. DaVinci Resolve has these different, if I can go to the color page, and then I can use all of the different color tools, the curves, the contrast wheels, all of the, the lift gamma gain wheels. Those don't move per se. And so it's a little bit of a, you can see Premiere as being more flexible. I can have a lot more tools based on Lumetri. I have access to more effects via third-party effects like Red Giant, Sapphire, Boris effects. Whereas in DaVinci Resolve, while I have a lot of different color tools built into the page, I don't have as many effects per se. Yes, I do have open effects, but they're different type of effects. They're really made more for editorial things. So there's a different paradigm of working in color here. So if I start and I start working with the effects page, if I start and I start working with the color grade inside the color workspace, which you can access by clicking this right here. Most people are starting on the editing or the effects page. You'll notice if I click over and then I go back to the color workspace, that if I go to another clip that doesn't have the Lumetri panel or the Lumetri effect added, and I click on here and I start to adjust it, immediately the Lumetri color effect is added on here. That's one of the things that a lot of people have trouble with, is they're saying, oh, this is so slow, is that I have to add this effect or all the effects to all of these different clips. Well, one of the things that the color workspace has fixed is the fact that I can literally just go sort of down my timeline and essentially similar to Lightroom, just sort of grade my clips here. So now that I have that shown here, we're going to just go down this timeline and grade these clips. I'm going to reset this by double clicking this tone wheel right here. Now, as I mentioned, these are red clips. So they need a input LUT to be able to transform them into Rec. 709. Now, there are two different places to use a transform LUT. You can use the input LUT right here, and you can use the creative. A lot of people get confused of the different purposes for this. Now I'm going to take one step back. This is not a red file. I've transcoded these. These are proxies that I've ended up creating, high quality proxies, but that's the only reason why I can't use the red raw settings to turn this into Rec. 709. I need to apply a LUT to take this out of the log space. So you can either use a LUT provided directly from the camera manufacturer. If it's not provided in the input LUT, in this case, my LUT is not provided, so I actually have to go and apply it directly. In this case, I'm actually just going to pull it directly from DaVinci Resolve. And I want to transform it from wide red gamut log 3G10, which is Red's proprietary log format, into Rec. 709 gamma 2.4, something that we're used to working with. So now these lookup tables may look really confusing, but these are directly downloaded from Red's website. They just give me a variety of different options, everything from gamma 2.2 to gamma 2.6. Now I'm going to choose this BT 1886, which is essentially gamma 2.4. And let's do low contrast. Oh, that's nice. Sorry guys, let me get into that real quick. That worked when we set it up. Of course, when you do the demo, it doesn't work. So let me jump right back there real quick.
Happens to the best of us, man.
It always does. Let me get back to the red. And UT86, let's make sure we get the cube, low contrast, and let's do a little bit of roll off. There we go. So as you can see, I have taken this log clip and I've given it an input LUT that I can now work with in a Rec. 709 space. Now, a lot of people say, why don't I just grade this, add a little bit of contrast, add some saturation, and call it a day? Well, in Resolve, this might work, but Premiere does not have any color management. Premiere is expecting a Rec. 709 Gamma 2.4 image. And while you can go clip to clip and mess around with this, add some contrast, add some saturation, and call it a day, you're going to have some problems when it comes to consistency and having clips look the same. You're going to essentially be rolling your own color management. It's completely on you to make them all look the same. So if you have a camera, a single camera or a single camera format that has an input LUT or a transform to go from log, it is highly recommended that you use the input LUT provided by the manufacturer if it's at all possible. So here, what I can actually do is I can go and copy this to all the other clips that were shot on this. Now I know that that's a DJI, but this I know is the exact same camera. So I can literally copy that. And then I can start grading underneath it. There's something that must have happened to that proxy. But you can essentially start to go through, and most importantly, one of the things that a lot of people miss is that you don't need to do this over and over again. Very similar to rolling your own LUTs, Adobe Premiere has what is called looks or presets. So what you can do is you can actually right click and you can save your own preset. So if you're going to another program and after you've done a grade or after you've done a color correction, so let's for instance go back to this first clip right here. Say that I know that I'm going to be working with this type of clip over and over again. Now I know that I haven't done any color correction to this clip. I want to reset the contrast right here, but I'm going to be working with this camera. We shot day in, day out with this camera. And so I want to apply this specific input LUT over and over again with the Lumetric color. What I can do is I can go to this Lumetric color and I can save this as a preset. So I'll call this red, log 3, G10, high contrast. And now in my effects controls, you'll see that I now have a brand new preset that I can just literally apply to a clip. So if I go and I find another clip, all of a sudden, I don't have to go select that LUT again. I don't have to do all of the essentially prep work that I had to do with that. Now, this becomes even better if you end up having a lot of clips shot in the same area with the same lighting conditions with the same correction. So for instance, if you shot something in the same day over and over again, you can actually start to work with white balance, temperature, and tint and start applying actual color correction to a specific clip again. So for instance, if I actually wanted to warm this up a tiny bit, bring the exposure down a tiny bit, and add some contrast to make this really, really much more of a look, I can go ahead and save that off as another look and either apply it on top of the clip, or I can take the input LUT off and now save this as a look that I can apply on different clips, even if it's not made for this specific red camera. So going down, let's get back to this other clip right here. So let's play this clip back real quick. And let's pull up our scopes and take a look at the sky. So this is a pretty nice clip right now. The exposure is pretty good. I don't see too many balance issues. It's a warm clip. I actually think I would like it a little bit warmer. So what I want to talk about right now is color balance. Color balance is an issue that's really, really difficult to talk about because it's both a technical term, but it's also something that we feel and we have an opinion about. So it's also a creative decision that you need to make. So what I'm talking about in terms of color balance is I'm referring to the actual act and step of color correction. So in this clip, I'm seeing that the clip is warm, but I'm not actually talking that the clip is out of balance. I actually feel that this clip is warm, but it is balanced. by that, I mean that the clip is balanced. The shadows appear to be the shadows are black, meaning we don't have more red, more green, or more blue, but we do have a little bit of more red in the highlights. And while you may technically not say that that is balanced by definition, it is a warm day. She's on the roof. This looks like it's either New York or California. It is supposed to be a little bit warm. So in the context of this clip, this is a balanced clip. And if I wanted this entire scene to be essentially a warm look, this would work for me. And this is one of the issues that I see a lot with people that are getting started with color is you end up balancing all of the color tone out of an image. You might get it completely to neutral. And then on a warm scene, you end up having to push it back to warm. And you get something that looks somewhat artificial. So one of the things you should do when you are looking at a scene, don't just look at the shot. Look at the whole scene, take the context of the scene and the shot into perspective. If it's a warm scene, if it's a warm shot, don't try and grade all of the warmth or everything out of it, or vice versa. If it's a cool scene, don't do that as well. So if I had a ton of shots for this, I would definitely want to make sure that I try and keep her skin tone pretty warm. I want to keep these blues nice and poppy and warm. But one of the other issues is, especially with long narrative form, when you're going through a long form piece, you might have a scene with a couple minutes. One of the things that you want to look out for is problem shots. So we may have, in this scene, we have our talent going up to the roof here. Now we have our talent dancing here. Well, this is clearly a much better shot than this one. Let me apply our input LUT. This is a DJI, I believe this was a Phantom 4, but I'm not completely sure, but it is DJI D-Log.
Hey, Jason, we did have one quick question, and I think the answer is yes to it, but Mark had a question. Can these input LUTs be applied to the master clips in the bin before they hit the timeline? I'm assuming that yes. I mean, you can add them
absolutely
at this level. So
you definitely can. The only issue that you want to keep in mind when you're applying master clips to the clip level is LUTs do clip. So you're going to be, you want to keep in mind the order of operation. So for instance, right here, I have clipped highlights in the sun right here. So if I apply, I believe it's this Phantom, of course. I believe it's this a Phantom 4. But if you apply a LUT and you try to recover data from before the LUT, you're unable to do that. And if you apply them at the master clip level, you can't go before that. So just something you want to keep in mind, especially if you're working with non-log images. That's a cube. There we go. So in this case, if I wanted to try and recover some of this highlight data, and it was clipped out above 100, after the lookup table, I would be unable to do that. Luckily, in this case, it happens to be, if I turn the lookup table off, you can see it's well below 100. So I'm not clipping it there. But every once in a while, you will see that. And this is where you may want to work on the image with curves beforehand. You may apply a curves effect before the lumetri and try and bring down the highlights a tiny bit before you end up applying the lookup table. Okay, so this sequence is very similar. In fact, I'm going to do what we did over here. I'm going to save this as a preset. We're going to call this the DJI preset just to make things easier. Okay, now this clip is a great example. So this clip is looking a little dull right now. This is in Hawaii. This should be nice and punchy. So let's just start and see what we can do with this. We're now in a Rec 709 space. So this should be nice and punchy. This looks like it was taken at sunset. So let's see what we can do with this. I'm looking at our scopes right now, and we have more red than green than blue. So I'm going to try and color balance this a little and see what we can get out of it. One of my first steps when I get to color correction is to see if I can pull more out of the image. One of the biggest mistakes I learned when I was starting out in color is to try and stick stuff on top of the image. I want the image to speak for itself, and color balancing and essentially trying to pull out that extra data that's already inside of there you'll notice that by attempting different ways of balancing, whether you use the temperature control, whether you use curves, whether you use these, whether you use the three-way color wheels, you'll notice that they all have different ways of balancing the image, and one way may work significantly more successfully than the others, allowing your image to sing a little bit more. So let's try those, let's try all of them and see which one makes this image jump out more. So this is looking a little bit too warm for me. I want to see what it looks like if we cool it down a tiny bit. So I'll use our temperature control. Now you can see what our temperature control is doing based on my scopes right here. It's really starting to balance out our highlights right here. Now most people don't really use the temperature control too extreme, but just a neat tip, you can actually take the temperature control way more than 100 if you type it in manually. So if I wanted to, I could take it to 300 or negative 300. Not that you commonly want to do that, but you can really take it to an extreme if you want to set a very Blade Runner S2049 look like that. Excuse me, like that. Another thing you can also do if you don't want to drag it, you can also just pick and point to where you want it to. So I'm going to try and balance it right about there. Now I'm going to go back to my shadows and see how they're doing. Okay, it looks like we have a little bit of blue in my shadows. So what I'm going to do is go to my creative tab. A lot of people don't know what to do with these shadow and highlight tints. And I think they're really, really useful, not necessarily for tinting, but removing tints. So what I'm going to do is try and balance out our shadows right here using our shadow tint. So to get rid of a little bit of a blue tint, I'm going to add a tiny bit of warmth. So again, similar to the sliders, I don't need to necessarily drag this. I can also just pick this. But if I want to drag, you'll notice that it drags very slowly, allowing me to easily adjust to my image. Now you can see this is also manipulating a lot of the gamma too. So what I want to do first is I want to adjust the contrast. I want to give this image a tiny bit more pop and separate our highlights from our shadows and our gamma, essentially separating the different parts of our image a little bit. So I'll go back to our basic correction here and I'll increase our contrast, which you can see right in the Lumetri scopes what it's doing there. Now, I've unfortunately crushed or essentially destroyed the black data right there. You can see that I've lost some of that information in the shadows. So I'm going to use our shadow control to bring that up just a little bit. And then I'm going to bring down our whites just a tiny bit because this is sort of a combination between blue and magic hour. I don't want it to be too bright. And then I'm going to tweak our black levels just a little bit with that. I want them just below, just above crushing. Now I can go back and tweak this a little bit more. Now this is still a little bit too blue for me. So I want to add a tiny bit of warmth back into it. Okay, so now looking at our scopes, you can see that we have red, green, and blue. So I still have a little bit too much green in here for me. So I'm going to pull that out a tiny bit. Okay, so far our image is looking a little bit better. If I turn this off and on, obviously it's difficult to tell because of the lookup table. So what I'm going to do is we're going to apply two of these on here. We're going to go to the effects controls. We're going to take this first one and we're going to clear all of these out. Yeah, it's not going to work. Okay. Where did that one go? Let's undo it. There we go. Okay. So this guy, if I clear out, and so you can always delete this by double clicking on these. Now I just want to get this with our LUT on there so you can see our difference. I'm going to just unclick these real quick. I just want to show you guys the image with the LUT on there. So, nope. Awesome. Okay. So this one will take off the LUT. That's before. This is just not working as well as I wanted to. But regardless, we're not done with this yet. What I wanted to do, and one of the things that a lot of people stop, and one of the reasons that people bring in professional colorists, is the fact that we want to focus the image. So we're looking at this, and it's a neat clip, but I'm wandering over to the sky over here. So one of the things that I want to do is I want to bring the viewer's image down, the viewer's attention down over to the hotels here. So one of the things that is built into the Lumetri color panel is a vignette here. And you can access that right over on, if I make sure I'm on the correct. Let's go back to make sure my grade is back. That always is helpful.
Just a reminder to everybody, if you have questions, feel free to ask them in the chat pod, and I'll pass them along.
Yeah, please feel free to jump in. Okay, okay. So there's our grade so far. So this is looking okay, but honestly, it's not very driving. I'm looking at this on my reference monitor, and I'm sort of I'm wandering over to the sky right now. So what I want to do is I want to add a vignette to this, and the simplest way to add a vignette is over in the vignette tab. But if I crank this backwards and forwards, you can see my biggest gripe with this is it's always in the center. Now I can adjust the midpoint a little bit. I can adjust some roundness, and I can feather it, but it's always going to be in the center. Now, that's sometimes not a bad thing. You can always do a really, really loose vignette, and you can make it really, really round and make it light. It's not a bad thing. I'm going to focus on the middle of the image, but that's also not really creative. So I'm going to turn the vignette off. And one of the things that a lot of people don't quite grasp, as Premiere has a very innovative masking system. So what you can do is you can I'm going to add another instance of Lumetri. And this is a new actually instance that so Lumetri was added in Adobe CC 2015. And back then when you started to stack Lumetris, they got really, really slow. They've improved that significantly, and they've actually made it so you can name them. So for instance, I can have my input LUT right here. I can have my main color grade here, and then I can have my look layer right here. So you can actually have multiple versions of Lumetri, and then they're all controlled in your effects control, but you can access them all right here. So what I've made is I'm going to make this look, but I'm actually going to rename this and call this the vignette. And with every single effect inside Premiere, you have this ellipse mask, you have this 4-point polygonal mask, and you have this free draw Bezier mask. So I'm going to use this free draw mask, and I'm going to draw a mask around the sky here. Nope. So much better when you have a Wacom pen. I know you guys love that so much more. So what I want to do with that is I want to really, really feather it out, because I'm sure you guys have seen a visible mask with color correction before. And one of the best things you can do to make that less visible is to really, really feather it as much as you can. Now, let's expand it a tiny bit. And I'm going to let's go to our basic correction tab. And I can also do that right here if I wanted to, and just adjust the exposure a tiny bit. Now, if I click out, you can see what's happening. If I turn this on and off, all of a sudden I'm pushing the look down towards the middle of the image. Now, of course, if this image is moving, which it is, I can go ahead and track it. And because it's moving more than one frame, I want to track it the whole time. So I'm going to sit here for a minute and let it track its frame. And then all of a sudden, this mask / vignette is going to move throughout the whole clip. Now, this is one big reason that a lot of people use Resolve. What we're tracking right now is a very simple mask. It should be really quick, but it's taking 10 to 15, 20 seconds to track. In Resolve, it takes much faster, and you can do 4, 5, 6 masks really, really quickly. And this is one of the things that is a little bit of a slow point in Premiere. And as you'll see in Resolve in a minute, it goes faster, you can do more masks, and you're able to repeat them and iterate much quicker. Not that it's a negative thing with Premiere, but you're less likely to pull out a mask and do an isolation or qualification when you can't track as quickly. You also aren't willing to be able to do highly complicated tracks like eyes, lips, mouths, ears, stuff like that, when you can't do edits as quickly and you may have to retrack an entire face again. Those of you that have done highly complicated VFX work know that it's really not easy to go back and redo a mocha track or something like that when something has moved drastically. And a lot of times in a color session, whether stuff has slipped or slid in an edit, you may have to completely retrack large sections of the film. And having a tracking system that can do that very, very quickly is crucial. So I find myself in other applications like Premiere or Final Cut 10 using a lot less tracking in my color correction simply because of the time budget. So as we're sitting here, and I've talked about this, it's still tracking. So I'm gonna stop this right now. And we actually, this actually is a great thing because I could have gotten away not really animating this. As you can see, I don't really need to do anything with that. So that's a great sort of tip that I can mention is always watch your clip in motion to see if you can lie, cheat, and steal and not track something and get away with it. Just like editing, color correction is all about trying to see what you can get away with. So what are we? We're at 40 minutes. I don't want to go too much over before we jump into Resolve. Does anybody have any specific Premiere questions?
Well, there was, it's not a Premiere specific question so much as it's a, Mark asked, for the novice, what is your order of operation when color correcting a clip? And you you can cover that now when you get into Resolve, whenever, you know, or now.
I'll jump into that when I get into Resolve, but just the, yeah, I'll do it right now. So usually one of the first things that I recommend for all clips, and it's just, I think it's easier in Resolve based on the interface. I think it's a little bit overwhelming when you have all of this in front of you in Premiere, but adjust the contrast. Adjust the black and white part of the image, the luminance of an image. Start with the shadows, start with the highlights, go to the gamma, and repeat. And once you have that working, you can start really adjusting the image better. One of the things that's really difficult to do is it's really easy to lose track of what I call the black levels. And for instance, you may see a film with the black levels adjusting throughout the whole film, and it's easy to lose track of that. So one of the things I have to do, even as years being a colorist, is I have to watch the film back, and all I'm looking for is the black levels of the film, just to make sure they're consistent. But for order of operations, I would say start at for luma levels first. So start at shadows, go to highlights, go to gamma, then repeat until that's looking good. Then start at saturation. You can adjust saturation, then start working on color balance, then move on to the next shot. So it's basically, you're going through the major issues first, and don't try and tackle everything that you don't do qualifications, don't do keys, don't do any of that stuff until you've done a basic primary color balance on all of your clips that need it.
All right, and we have one more question. It says, this is from Brian. One of the questions that I have is just using LUTs in general. I find them to never really achieve what I'm looking for. I'm a novice at using LUTs, but there are so many out there and everyone's got some packs. So I'm curious if you can elaborate on that.
Certainly. So I've written a lot of articles, and I've actually written a whole training series on using LUTs. So I completely understand it can be really confusing. I think understanding that LUTs are black boxes that have no idea what's going in and out of them helps a little bit to understand why they're so frustrating. It's going back to the square peg and the round hole approach is really why I think LUTs break down. It's really easy to have somebody give you a LUT or a lookup table and say, this is going to work for X, Y, and Z. And it's then to assume it's going to work for the whole alphabet. And I'll use the most common case. I want to use the film lookup table that was used on movie X, and I want to apply it on my footage, and I want it to give me the same type of look. Well, the fact of the matter is a lookup table, one of my clients the other day was using a lookup table to talk about things for Excel, nothing to do with films. So the fact of the matter, a lookup table is simply taking your colors and moving them and shifting them in one way to another. The most important thing about a lookup table is to know, one, where it's coming from, and two, what is it intended to do. So I'll take one step back on that, and I'm going to spend a couple minutes on lookup tables because I think it's so important and I understand the frustration behind it. And I'm actually going to pop open Resolve while I discuss that. So there's a couple different points of a lookup table. A lookup table can be a technical conversion in which we are changing a log image into a Rec 709 or into an HDR image or to a P3. So it's a conversion. It's helping us do a technical transformation. A lookup table can help us apply a creative look, like a lot of the LUT packs out there are doing. It can be a combination of the two. So a lot of the problems that people have is they're applying creative LUTs with built-in transforms. So a lot of the packs that you see that are specifically built for a Sony camera or a Blackmagic camera or a DJI camera or Insert X camera here are a combination of creative lookup tables combined with technical conversions. And one, we don't know what's happening in that creative look. So it can be anything anybody wants to do, whether it's good or whether it's bad. And the technical conversion may come from the manufacturer. It may not. It may be somebody adding their own thing there. So it's difficult to say what exactly is happening, but it's not surprising to see that the process breaks down really easily because it's sort of like the black market. You may have medications or drugs that come from a manufacturer and all of a sudden they get passed around and all of a sudden they lose their purpose and what are they used for and what was put in them, and all of a sudden it's supposed to just be used for this purpose and it gives you this effect. And when it doesn't, you're wondering what happened to this or why isn't it doing this? And the fact of the matter is it started off as baby aspirin or this or that. And so what I'm trying to say is that people use LUTs as an excuse. But what I would highly suggest is trying to figure out, what are you trying to do with the LUT? Are you trying to apply a look to it? Are you trying to transform your footage from a color space, from one color space to another? Or are you trying to do multiple things? And once you can put your mind to that, you're able to simplify it much better. One of the things that I think is really, really common, and trust me, I still do this too, is I'm looking for something a tool to help me expand my skills, a tool that will help me give me something that the other guy doesn't have, that give my footage a look, a feel, a texture that some other colorist or an artist doesn't have. And as much as I want to say that let's do that and can't do that, you're 99% of the time just going to be applying somebody else's work to your work. And most of the time that's not going to work unless it's extremely prepared for that. Creating the Pixel Tools product took me months, and I want to say that most of that time was not actually creating the grades. That time was spent preparing that product for mass consumption and making sure it worked on a wide variety of footage. So the fact that Joe Schmo's lookup tables that work great for his YouTube videos, the way he shoots them on his camera, when you don't get that result on your footage, it really isn't that surprising. And that's also when you hear things like Roger Deacon talking about using one lookup table. He's talking about a lookup table that he designed for the way he shoots on the ARRI cameras that he uses. So it's not that there's special sauce in there, it's that he's designing a transform for his specific use case. And sure, somebody can steal that and put it on their camera and try and say it's the Roger Deacon LUT, but it absolutely will not look like it's shot by Roger Deacon. So I hope that added some clarity to that.
I think so. And we've got another question here from Nate. I have another question about the order of operations. He has two questions, actually. Typically in Resolve, you apply your LUT or CST towards the end of your node tree. Do you ever do that same workflow here in Premiere, or do you always apply the LUT first? And then I'll do his follow-up question after that.
So real quick, and then Resolve is open up. Well, Resolve's opening up, and I'm going to switch over to mine real quick. So the workflow for Premiere is a little bit different than Resolve because Premiere is expecting a Rec 709 based, it's a Rec 709 based workflow. And for most of the time, I'm trying to get my image over to Rec 709 as easily as possible. The reason that I tend to use a LUT at the beginning for Premiere is that most of the tools in Premiere are expecting a Rec 709 based image. If there are tools, there are certain plugins, there are some plugins like some of the Red Giant plugins and some of the third-party plugins that know to look for log footage. They do that math separately, or differently. Then I'm less likely to apply a LUT directly at the beginning. But because the way that Premiere is designed and the way that it is expecting a Rec 709 log normalized signal and not log data, I need to get that data into what it's expecting as soon as possible, hence why that input LUT is the first step of the lumetric tree. So it's just sort of the workflow. If, for instance, and this is a common mistake you'll see on a lot of forums, you try to apply a transform LUT in the creative section, you'll notice the controls in the basic tab don't work quite right. They'll work, but they're going to work very funky. And that's because it's expecting a video-based Rec 709 signal, not that log signal.
One other question that he had was, also, is it correct that when you apply the LUT in the basic controls, you don't clip out information, but when you apply them in the creative tab, you do clip out information?
Technically, LUTs are going to clip out information. Anything above 100 and anything below 0 is going to clip out. One of the things that I am constantly learning about the lumetri panel. R. Neil Hagen is a huge source. You'll probably see him on the Adobe forums. He is a great both resource, and he really does dig out a lot of stuff from the Adobe engineers. One of the things that I learned from him was the fact that a lot of the basic controls are designed in a way that they prevent you from clipping the image. So for instance, if you take a grayscale image and you put it on the basic controls and you try and use exposure and pump it all the way up, you'll notice that it doesn't allow you to clip that out. So they were designed in a way to try and help you from breaking the signal that way. But technically, if you really wanted to, you could clip the signal with an input LUT.
Okay, and Brian would love a link to your training if that's something you're able to share, and maybe you can put that in the chat pod near the end.
Absolutely.
And then Caleb has a question. Order of operations follow-up. Doesn't changing the saturation levels affect luminance?
It depends on, so I'll take a step back. It won't change luminance, but it also depends on how you're changing saturation. More importantly, what I want you to look at is, so the most video data is dealt with in Premiere in a YUV. So what you're modifying with the Y is your luma data, and then the UV is your color data. So what you're taking a look at with the black and white image is you're modifying the Y, and then with your color, you're modifying the UV. Now this can differ if you're working with RGB data, but technically you should not be modifying your saturation when you're not changing your luminance when you're adding saturation. It will look differently though. That's one of the reasons that I encourage people to modify their contrast and their luminance on a black and white image. We perceive color images and black and white images differently. But if you look at the scopes and you have a luma waveform up there and you have saturation on and off, it should not change.
All right, I think that is currently all the questions we have. So if you want to pick it back up.
Let's do it. Okay, we're jumping into Resolve now. Okay. So we'll go on the same one. I could do something differently. So I am now working with the raw source on this. This is the raw DNGs and the raw red files just for performance. So if you guys wanted to see my breakdown, this is my breakdown for it. So normally I try and keep my nodes a little bit nicer. But as you can see, as you start to grade stuff, they get a little bit crazy. Now, I do want to mention that colorist Scott Stacy really helped me out with this in terms of the grade. Now, this is a shot that I want to show you guys something that's sort of neat on. Now, I'll show you the before and the after. This is the same shot that we worked on in Premiere. And this has a similar sort of tip that I was showing in Premiere. One of the things that I want to show you guys is up here. So I used a vignette to add a bunch of warmth to the top while adding a bunch of cool colors to the bottom. And I'm essentially going for that cool, warm vibe. Now I saw that built into the image already. I see I have a bunch of warmth up here. And then I don't really have a cool tones down here, but because they're opposites on the color wheel, and if I pull up our vector scope, ooh, come on now. If I pull up our vector scope and I go to a 2x zoom, you'll see that we really have essentially just a very monochromatic look right now. And by putting that grade on, you can see that we're really splitting right down that vector scope right there. And that's essentially how you can make a complementary color look. If you just go essentially across the vector scope. So whether it's a magenta green, a yellow blue, a red cyan, that's how you can make a look, so to speak. So if you're always, that's a common question is how do I get a look? How do I know what to make a look? Well, one of the things you can do, for instance, is if you have things that are all over the place, for instance, we have magenta, we have blue, we have green, we have red. One of the things I can attempt to do with this shot is I can attempt to narrow my color spectrum. So right over here, and we have these back in Premiere too, but I'll show you how to use these, is hue versus hue, hue versus saturation, and hue versus luminance curves. So let's blow this away real quick, and we'll start from scratch on here. Now, this is a DJI shot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a color space transform, which is really similar to a lookup table, but it's essentially mathematics instead. So instead of clipping, I have no worries about clipping with this. So, but you're wondering, wait, what is going on in the highlights right there? That sure looks like clipping, doesn't it? What I just have to enable is this tone mapping, and all of a sudden, all of the image is perfectly protected. Another neat little thing is this gamut mapping. So what this does is if you've ever had a highly high gamut camera, like an ARRI or a RED that is capturing a really, really wide color spectrum, this allows it to fold those highly saturated colors back into a less colorful color space like Rec. 709 without those colors looking weird. Now, if you've ever had a drone that has the sun that looks yellow or red or orange, have you guys ever had that before? Yeah, that would be what happens when you try and capture really, really saturated colors with a sensor or a camera that can't really do that. And when you capture those and you try and essentially compress them into something like Rec. 709 or sRGB, what we view on a regular monitor, they end up looking false. So something like gamut mapping essentially tries to naturally compress those colors into something that may look essentially more natural without throwing them away completely. So now we have a much more normal looking image here, and we can start grading with it. Now, similar to the way in Premiere, I'm going to start with our color balance. Now, different than Premiere, I'm going to grade underneath my color transform. As opposed to in Premiere, I was talking about working with Rec. 709 images, right? That's where I would work after my LUT. So that's where I would do temperature tint. But because this is log data, and I'm in Resolve, I have complete control of my color pipeline. I can see that my data comes off my hard drive right here. I have an empty node here. My image is going from log to Rec. 709, and then I can do something here. What this node allows me to do is this node allows me to work with that log data. And a lot of the tools inside Resolve are specifically made to do that. So in this case, I'm going to use something called the chromatic adaptation. Now, this sounds really, really complicated, but once you see what I'm doing here, it will all make sense. Basically, chromatic adaptation is a mathematical way to change color temperature on non-raw clips. So all of a sudden, I can say this was shot at, I'll say this is maybe like 3,200. And I want to move it to like 5,000. Now, what I need to do is tell it what type of clip it is. So this is a D-log. Excuse me, D-gamut and D-log. Now I can have really fine control over this. And it's going to be essentially the way light works. It's going to work much more naturally than if I were adding printer points, if I were working the temperature and tint controls. And it works really well with DPs who work with, I wanted this Kelvin and I shot it wrong. So all of a sudden, I can literally start by typing these color temperatures in. So most people don't even know about this effect. This was added in Resolve 16. And all of a sudden, you can start by treating a lot of your non-raw media as if it were raw. Now, let's be honest here. It's not raw media, but it gives you this really, really cool color temperature control that you would never have access to in Premiere or any other application. Now, I'm going to add another note here because I'm not quite done yet. Now, I don't really like that. That's too, I want a little bit cooler. Now, I'm not quite liking that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of that. And you're going to see me do something that a lot of colorists do, but you don't see it very often. And it's trying different ways to grade a clip. So I didn't like what that was doing. So now I'm going to try color balancing a different way. Now, Resolve also has temperature and tint controls right here. And I'm going to use the temperature and tint control. Similar to Premiere, I can adjust to my liking and then balance out the green to taste. Now, similar to Premiere, this control does work in Rec 709. Or this control is expecting Rec 709, but you'll notice that it does still work pretty well with log data. So that's another thing that I wanted to point out with color correction. Although sometimes things may be technically correct or incorrect, I think the most important thing to remember is if it looks right and the client pays a check at the end of the day, it is right. There's some things that are really difficult and at the forums, you want to argue about them and this is not technically right, this doesn't do this. If it works, it works. And if it's fast, it's fast. So there's a lot of times that people don't want to admit to doing things that are reverse engineering things or that they've had to do things that may not be technically correct, but it gets it done and it gets it done fast. And editors do this all the time and they are not shy about it. It's called lie, cheat, and steal. And they actually show off about it. They brag about it. They post it on Twitter that look what I did. Look what my client didn't even know about. This is amazing. And it's shamed upon by colorists. So I just want to point out there that this happens with LUTs, this happens with color grading, this happens with a control. And I wanted to point out that I am using this temperature control, even though it's designed to be used after the LUT. I'm using it before the LUT and it's working okay. And that's fine. If something works for you, go for it, use it that way. So I'm gonna leave that right there because I like how this is doing. Now what I want to do is I want to do the same thing. I want to bring focus over to these hotels here. So we're going to draw that same mask. I'm going to navigate over to Windows over here, and I'm going to draw a custom mask. Okay, I'm going to soften it up by dragging the softness all the way up right over here, and I'm going to use Shift-H to highlight the mask. Now, I'm going to use everything on the UI right now. I have a panel in front of me and I have a bunch of buttons that make this faster, but I want to show you guys how quick this can be on a keyboard and mouse. So I track this real quick forward and it's not liking that it doesn't have enough data. So what I'm going to do is make the mask bigger to give it more data and I'm going to move it lower. There we go. I've given the mask enough data that it can track. So it's gone and it's tracked this, great. Okay, now that the mask is tracked, I'm going to move it right back up here, and look at this. It stays exactly where I want it to. So that's one of the things also is if you're tracking in Resolve and you're not able to get a track that you need to, you can always track it on something else. You can make the mask smaller, you can make the mask larger, you can make it another size. And once you've got your track data, you can move the mask around. It's going to remember what it was and what the track data was. So I can move this out here and you can see it's still going to follow approximately based off the movement that I did. Now, that's not the only thing that I want to do. Now that we have done that, I actually want to add a little bit of outside feathering to go down there. And let's do a tiny bit of inside feathering too. Let's turn off highlight mode and shift tilde to get rid of the highlight of the window. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to our primaries and I'm going to drop the gamma just a tiny bit. Not that much. I'm going to reset that. And we're going to drop the gamma just a tiny bit. If I do before that move and after, we can see we're just bringing a little bit more focus down to the middle of the image. Now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to draw another mask. We're going to add another curve. Now you may have noticed that I'm not able to draw a mask here. This is a common issue with DaVinci Resolve. What has just happened is I need to get off. You just turn the tool back off. And there you go. You're able to turn that back on. That was because I turned the window highlight with Shift tilde. You can either use Shift tilde to turn it back on, or you can enable or disable the tools, and that will bring the mask highlight back on. It's a super annoying little quirk, but once you've done it a couple times, you're able to get through it. Now, I also wanted to highlight this color here, and we will track. Now, another quick tip, if you have a very complex grade in DaVinci Resolve, you will notice the tracking is slowed down. If you disable your grade with Shift D, the tracking is significantly faster. I'm going to Shift D to turn my grade back on. Now, if I turn this on and off, you can see that I've really gone and highlighted the buildings. Now, if I add one more node, I'll use Alt-S. One of the things that I want to do is continue using this masking work. So I'm going to take the alpha, which is the opposite of this. And if I Shift H, you can see that I'm getting everything except what I masked, or the outside of my mask right there. What I'd like to do is I'd like to add some sharpening to this. Well, I don't need to mask, I don't need to track. It's all being used from the previous node. So I'm going to go to my blur tab right here, and I'm going to take my radius and just go down a tiny bit. Now you can see that it is really sharpening this up. So I'm just going to literally go down to like 4.7. And if I zoom in and I turn off my clips, you can see that it's adding just a touch, especially right over here. For you Adobe folks, this is very similar to like an unsharpened mask at like 2.5. So one of the issues that I see right here, if you zoom in, is I can see my mask is cutting in, something's cutting in right there. So what I need to do is go here and add some feathering. And add a little bit of softness so that it looks more natural. There we go. So if I play this clip back, my eyes are now going more towards the hotels. Now, also, if this, for instance, was a competitor hotel and I did not want to look at this, we can go even further. So I could put a circle mask right over here and say I wanted to blur this out a little bit. Well, I don't really want to blur it out. I just don't want you to focus on it. So I'm going to use something called midtone detail, which is similar to like contrast in the midtones, but I'm going to do it towards the negative. So I'll do that. And you'll see it just took a little bit of sharpening in the negative direction on this. Now, if I also take that and I drop the gamma a tiny bit, I'm not going to really go towards that area. So if I take these 3 nodes, you can see that we have really highlighted this area right here. Now, let's say we want to tweak color a little bit more. We've done texture a tiny bit. Let's say we want to go back and talk about color. Well, Adobe Premiere has this exact same control, but I thought it was just easier to explain in DaVinci Resolve. So we have the hue versus curves. Hue versus allows us to specifically adjust all of the colors without any keys or qualifiers. And that's really, really important, especially if you have compressed material like a lot of people are shooting on, whether it's a Sony or a Canon, anything that's shooting an H.264 or H.265 material. The less keys and qualifiers you can do, the better. And that's where these hue versus curves are incredibly helpful. So what these hue versus curves do, they're different from your typical RGB curves, is they allow you to select a hue versus and then adjust it with another hue. So for instance, say that I want to change the color of the sky. I'm going to select the hue of the sky. In this case, it's about red, a little bit magenta, and then I'm going to shift it to another hue, or hue versus hue. So I'm going to select it right here. I'm going to make sure that I have my pointer selected, and you'll see that it added a point right here. If I drag this up, you'll see I'm changing the sky and vice versa. Now you can see it's posturizing because I have too many dots right here, and I'm basically trying to make too fine of a correction. What I'm going to do is make a much broader correction to all of magenta. Now I'm pushing, and you can actually see what's happening right in my hue versus curve. You can see that all of magenta is shifting over to blue, and all of magenta is shifting over to green. So let's do a much, much milder effect. I'm not so fond of the sky. I want it to be a little towards warmth, not magenta. So I'm going to push it towards warm a little bit. Okay, let's modify the ocean a little bit. Let's make this a little bit more on the green side, a little bit less blue. And on the teal, let's push the teal a little bit more as well. Now, if we go to the next one, we have hue versus saturation. And if you're guessing this modifies saturation based on the specific color, you would guess correct. So let's see. You can actually see that we have a ton of red in here. So I'm going to reduce that by selecting that and just dragging it down a little bit. And you can see all it's doing. I can make it really, really saturated or just reduce it a tiny bit without touching any other color. So I'm going to add a nice bit of blue and teal right there, and a tiny bit of green. And I don't want that red to disappear. That's a nice little contrast right there as well. Going to the next one, we have hue versus luminance. Now, what hue versus luminance does is something that confuses a lot of people. We are adjusting the brightness of a specific color. So how bright and dark individual colors are. So for instance, watch the sky right now when I adjust this. I'm making the sky brighter, and I'm making the red darker. Now you'll notice that this is a sort of destructive control. It's difficult. So in that you can only make mild adjustments, especially to compressed material, without it falling apart. So you want to be careful with the hue versus luma curve. But for instance, if you want to make some unique looks, you want to, for instance, drop down blue, you can make a very sophisticated look by dropping down blue about 10%. For instance, if you look at a jeans commercial, the jeans commercials is luma dropped about 10 to 15%, and it gives it that nice, sophisticated, punchy blue without being too saturated. So for instance, I can give you a hint of that right here. But unfortunately, it breaks pretty easy, as you can see, simply from all that noise there. So I'll leave that there. Going forward, we have the Luma versus Sat. Now, if you haven't been using Luma versus Sat in either Premiere or Resolve, I guarantee you this is going to be one of your favorite controls. Digital cameras tend to capture stuff really, really saturated, and it doesn't tend to look very filmic, and it doesn't tend to match the way that I think most people see with their eyes. Specifically, it's recording a lot of saturation in the highlights and a lot of saturation in the shadows. What you can do with Luma versus saturation is you can go and tell DaVinci Resolve or Adobe Premiere that I would like to reduce the saturation just in the highlights, just in the shadows, or both. So here, I can see that I have a significant amount of saturation in the shadows, not very much in the highlights, and a little bit in the midtones. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to reduce the saturation in the shadows, boost it in the midtones, and really boost it in the highlights. Now, this image is not going to be for everybody. I happen to really like hyper saturated punchy images, but this is the power of the Luma versus Sat curve, is the fact that you can really control the image simply based off of if there's saturation in the highlights and shadows. Now, one of the greatest tricks is you can literally make it really, really saturated up until the very, very brightest point. And especially if you have an image that's clipping, there should be almost no saturation in the very, very brightest points of the image, like the sun, that very, very last couple IREs. And you can use a control like Luma versus Shadow to help you essentially desaturate those really, really bright saturated colors that are looking digital and unnatural. And then last but not least is saturation versus saturation. Basically, you can adjust saturation based off saturation values. So you can adjust saturation for colors that are already highly saturated, or saturation for colors that are not very saturated. In this case, it appears that there are not a lot of saturated colors, so I can increase those while decreasing the colors that are highly saturated, vice versa. I can easily decrease the colors that are highly saturated and possibly going to fail QC, while increasing all the other colors that are not very highly saturated to give me a nice punchy image without blowing everything out. And these really, really outliers out here in the sky, I can bring them down just to make sure that they're staying within range there. So a lot of people don't use the hue versus curves, but they really, really do make a huge difference in color correction to make not only your work stand out, but you can make some very, very creative looks. So last but not least, I want to show you, you can see that I spent a ton of time sort of developing this look and messing around with it, but you may not have time to do that all the time, especially in Resolve when you have all of these different tools. And that's essentially why I develop things like pixel tools, where I have essentially hundreds of different looks here that I can just, here, let's make sure that we have.
One quick question
Yeah.
was from Bob, says, how long do you stay on one frame before checking the entire clip?
That's a fantastic question and a problem that I still run into. I try and play back I like to play back the clip and find a hero frame, and then every once in a while I'll play it back just to remind myself, and then every once in a while I'll walk away. The biggest problem that I think that I can find, not necessarily forgetting the rest of the clip, but not watching and not being aware of an issue, something that goes out of frame, something that comes in frame, something that walks through and breaks tracking. So it's really important to always play a clip back. I'll usually turn a clip on loop and watch it 1 or 2 times if it's a long clip. But the biggest mistake you can make is starting to grade a clip without watching it back.
All right.
Awesome. So one of the things that I found really, really helpful as a colorist, and same thing with VFX artists, is having presets aside. Whether you build them yourself, whether you buy them, but taking the time to mess around and go, okay, you know, I have some extra time, so I'm going to build this night vision look. I'm going to build a South America look. I'm going to build all these different looks. And so I've spent a couple months building these looks that I eventually branded and now sell them as pixel tools. But essentially, the beauty of these and the reason that they're different than lookup tables is that they are completely built inside DaVinci Resolve. And you can go in here and see that all I've done is gone and just messed around with the curves, hue versus saturation, all the different tools in Resolve to create these looks. Now, again, you guys are busy. I know you want to render this out and call it a day. So a lot of the times, I don't even look within these anymore. I'm combining these, I'm slapping them on a project, I'm rendering them out, I'm showing the client which one do you want to use and adjusting it and calling it a day. But a lot of the times, these are really, really useful to learn Resolve, to learn how you do something. That's one of the biggest issues when you're working isolated and alone right now is you can't see other artists. And I think one of the biggest leaping points for me as a creative colorist and moving along in my career was the ability to sit with another colorist and see how they work and see how it's different and see what I'm not doing correctly, or not even not correctly, but differently, and see how I can do things in a new, different way that might result in a totally different image. So, and that's what I hope that Pixel Tools will do for other people is maybe you can look in and see the way that I grade, and maybe it'll inspire you to do something a little bit differently. Maybe it'll inspire you to combine things. One of the things that I highly recommend people mess around with is, so yes, I developed these grades. These all came out of my head. A lot of people helped me them. But one of the things that I think I had the most fun with in building this product is the fact that I have started to come up with really, really unique looks that I would have never developed on my own. For instance, I had no idea what I was doing when I just made this 2 seconds ago. I combined my tobacco look with a teal orange look. And I would have never combined this on my own, but this is a pretty interesting look that you can quickly combine and create on your own. And that the whole point of these different utilities, like if you want to like you're talking about different types of saturation boosts. This is a saturation boost using the LAB color space. And it's very, very different than typically using your color boost or vibrance or saturation. So I think one of the most important things of being a colorist is having different tools accessible to you. Like going back to the LUT question, like these are my LUTs now, in the sense that I like to use these as jumping off points. I'll use these when I'm starting a project and I want to see what might the client like, what direction do they want to go to, and what do they not want to go to. And I think that's extremely important too. And people that are using LUTs, I have a ton of lookup tables. A lot of people ask me like, oh, so you're the anti-LUT guy, aren't you? And I don't think that's true. I absolutely love lookup tables. I like reverse engineering them and I don't have a problem with them. But it's important to understand where they're coming from and what they're useful for. What they're not useful for me is having full control over my project, because I can't turn off parts of it. I can't have control over the product color if it's turning a weird shade of pink or green or blue based off that film emulation. But when I have the individual controls of each Resolve tool that's been used to create the look, I can go in and say, oh yeah, this is Coke red. You're not making this Coke red. I can go turn off the hue versus hue curve for that look that's tweaking the red and call that a day. So that's one of the reasons that I would highly recommend, whether you're in Premiere, whether you're in Resolve, whether you're in Baselight, create presets for yourself, buy presets for yourself, do whatever you need to do to create your look library. Both the applications are really, really set up in a way that you can make the application work for you better. And that's the biggest tip if you walk away with today is don't try and buy tools to make you a better artist. Start messing around in After Effects, start messing around with Premiere and save those presets. You never know when you're going to go back and go, like this warm highlights glow was something that I pulled off a project 2 years ago, and it's been my most useful preset that I think I've ever developed. And there's nothing complicated about it. It's just the fact that it's that it's really easy to use and that I can drag it on there and then adjust the color is saved me so many times.
Real quick, Jason, a question from our Zoom from Dan Diaz. Do you like or prefer the sharpening from OFX?
So I'll jump into that real quick. So the sharpening tool from here, I jumped to this one because I've been using Resolve for a long time. My issue with it is that it applies to the entire image, and that's usually not what I want to do anymore. But yes, I go here just because it's what I'm used to, and also I can access it on my panel. What I do recommend people do now is called Sharpen and Soften. And this is the ideal plugin for sharpen and softening. If you're familiar with a term called frequency separation, that's essentially what this plugin is. And do I have another clip this will work better on? What this allows you to do is it allows you to essentially target small, medium, and large textures within the image. And so you can sharpen and soften very particular things. So if you had, I don't think I have human skin right here, but if you have, one of the most common things for sharpening is you'll sharpen and soften human skin to de-age or reduce wrinkles and stuff, but you don't want to reduce the texture and completely decimate the pores. And the sharpen and soften effect really allows you to target for instance, the medium textures when you can get rid of the acne without getting rid of all of that skin texture. So I highly recommend the sharpen and soften effect. And also you can essentially target what this small texture is. So it really is a very, very cool tool. Cool. Last but not least, I do want to give everybody that's not what I want to show. If for instance, you guys want to look into Pixel Tools, I am running a sale on it right now. You feel free to use, that is not my website. Feel free to check it out. We have some free power grades that you guys can download for DaVinci Resolve. You can get 8 of them for free, including some of the ones I showed tonight. And if you'd like to purchase it, feel free to use the code WFM2020, Work From Home 2020, for 30% off. Yep, that's how you get the free ones. So these should give you guys a quick start inside DaVinci Resolve. I'm working on some Premiere Pro ones, but if you guys have ideas, it's a lot easier to do stuff inside Resolve for the kind of presets like this. So if you guys have idea of what you guys would like inside Premiere, I'm definitely starting to brainstorm a Pixel Tools product for Premiere. So definitely give me some ideas if there's stuff that you absolutely need.
But one thing I was going to note too is, and I think you said this, but just so people know, the hue versus saturation, the hue versus luminance, all those those are all in Premiere in Lumetri as well. So
yeah, and I jumped through that pretty quickly, but like they're all in Lumetri, and I actually think that they're a little bit more friendly in Lumetri, because when you go up and down with them, that's why I'm launching it real quick just so I can show you guys right before we finish up. But Adobe's done a fantastic job. I hope if Matt Christensen's listening to this, huge props to Matt Christensen and Patrick Palmer and his whole team for really going above and beyond on this.
I'll let him know you said that. We'll tag him in a post.
I love Patrick. So let me unlock this and I can show you guys real quick. So one of the reasons that I really do like this, oh my key, come on guys. Cursed. Okay, so for instance, it works in the exact same way. I highly recommend you put a couple things here, but look what happens when I go up and down. In Resolve, it might be a little difficult to understand, like what color am I shifting it to? What am I doing to this? Well, it's really easy to see, oh, I'm making this more yellow. I'm making this less yellow. Same thing over here. I'm making this more blue. I'm making this less blue. If I make this really big over here so you guys can see, same thing with hue versus hue. It's just a very intuitive process. So for instance, if I want to shift this teal to yellow.
I don't know that it's coming through. I'm not seeing the changes. Yeah, I don't know if you're seeing it there, but on Zoom, I'm seeing you make the adjustment, but I'm not seeing it come up in the program monitor.
Yeah, well, it's because it's log data. So this is actually a perfect example here. This is why a lot of people get frustrated with Lumetri here. It's because this is log data, and these tools are made to work with Rec 709. And so a lot of people throw on log stuff and go, this stuff sucks. It's not working. Why is it not working? And so like one of the reasons I started saying, it's Rec 709 normalized first is these tools really don't work well when you don't normalize. Is this gonna, this is a black magic, but here, if I throw this on, it's a RA log CLUT. Again, if it works, call it a day. But now if I do that, you can see that let me do a hue versus hue for some things, for some real difference. Check out her shirt. So if you see her, there we go. Let's use our real estate, guys. So if you check out her gown, you can see that I'm essentially doing some live clothing change right there. And if I didn't have that though, I can easily see on this that I can go, hey, let's make this red, or let's match this with the background. And same thing with over here. Now I want to take that, and I've just made all the skin brighter. So the hue versus luma and the luma versus sat, all of the hue versus stuff in Premiere is incredibly intuitive. And I can't say that it used to be this way, but they've done a a lot of great work to make this better. And if you're ever confused about you don't know what color's in there, you can use these eyedroppers to say like, I want to modify his skin. Oh, it's right here. It wasn't that one. It actually modified 2 points. And there you go. You can modify his skin to whatever you need it to be. So yeah, the Adobe hue versus hue curves are very, very powerful indeed.
We have one more question. Kevin was asking, what's the URL? I'm assuming that's for your website again. And like I said, we'll try to put that up in the chat pod
let me get in the chat right here real quick to do that.
And he also asked, and did you say WF 2020 or WFM 2020?
I should be WFM, work from home, WFH 2020. And if there's any issues, please feel free to email me at jason@pixeltoolspost.com. You can also find me on Twitter at jbowdacious. I would be happy to help you guys out if you have any problems.
Any other questions, folks? Let's give it a minute in case people are feverishly typing.
Yeah, WFH 2020. I just checked. And I'll move this over to my, there we go. Yeah, don't be shy, guys. Any questions? There's no such thing as a stupid question. I've deleted my entire Hydra before too. It all helps.
Let's see. Brian says, first Kevin says, thanks. Super informative comparison of the two tools. Brian says, is your training, is that on the pixeltoolspot.com as well?
So the training for the lookup tables was, it's actually available on rippletraining.com. And I will have, I can share a couple of links that I would recommend for stuff like LUTs and other things. If you guys have on your website and such, let me see, I can probably pull the Ripple training one right now. There we go. So it says it's for Resolve 14 and 15, but nothing has changed, I assure you.
We also have another question from Bill, who is asking, how do you price your services?
So pricing is a really, really difficult question nowadays. One of the things that I actually rely on is I try and keep similar to other people, and I try and go, being in Los Angeles is a really interesting market. And I'm sure San Diego is too. So one of the things that I'm trying to do is I'm trying to offer a quality service for independent film and television that doesn't need to go into a facility. I will go into a facility if needed, but you don't need to. I can also do everything remotely. So I'm trying to price my service underneath the facilities so essentially you can hire me as a completely independent colorist if you want to, without having to go and basically hire the facility with the food and the assistants and everything else. One of the most useful resources I have found for pricing my services is actually the Blue Collar Post Collective. They do a yearly, I want to say survey. And I have found that very, very useful because every market is different. AB5 is really, really difficult. I'm still wrapping my head around that. I think Eric actually has a much better understanding than I do, to be honest. But I think the best thing.
The topic for another day.
Yeah, that's a whole different. I think that can probably be a whole session on its own. But I don't want to say that I am in any way an expert on that. But I would say Blue Collar Post Collective is probably one of the best that you can use to find what the rate is, because the rate's going to constantly be changing. It's going to be different for your area. And I want to say every year it's probably going to change depending on how the industry is, how many freelancers are pushing for new services, how many editors are trying to be colorists, et cetera, et cetera. Los Angeles, there's a ton of people trying to get into the Company 3 and e-film. So there's always somebody leaving it's going to be the next top colorist. So I'm always trying to be competitive, but offer a great service. That's why I'm also a finishing artist too. I'm offering visual effects in the color suite as well. So it's a constantly changing sort of target kind of thing.
Let's see. And another question, well, actually a comment from Nate, who says, thanks for the info. Totally digging Chromic adaptation. He says, worth noting that it looks like Chromic Adaptation is a Resolve Studio only tool, though. Is that correct?
That is correct. And so I will mention that Resolve, so there is some of the stuff that I have mentioned that is going to be for Resolve Studio only. I will mention that Resolve Studio, I purchased a lot of software. I have purchased a lot of software. I know how it is to constantly be pushed to purchase different software. I own 3 different versions of Resolve, and it's probably the most useful. I've paid $1,000 for it. I've paid $299 for it twice. It is the most useful piece of software I've ever purchased, and I have upgraded every year for free, each time with new features and new effects. So I would highly recommend, if you use it at all and there's a single feature, whether it's deinterlacing, whether it's transcoding, that I would consider using the free version. I ended up having to upgrade to the paid version a number of years ago, simply because I think it was noise reduction was one of the features that I needed. But it's gotten to the point where the studio version is a very, very good deal. And I think the fact that they don't do subscriptions, and at least so far, I'm going to knock on wood, they haven't required any additional purchases. It's a really good deal for $299.
I'm going to do a quick shout out to Twain Richardson, who I see.
Oh, yes.
And just an awesome guy and a Resolve expert in his own right. But we actually do have another question here from Nate. He says, when you're in Resolve grading log footage and it isn't going to broadcast, do you still use a CST or ACES to conform the footage to Rec 709, or do you ever conform it to sRGB instead?
So most of the time I'm using I want to say 99% of the time I'm using a CST effect. Every once in a while, if I'm feeling old school, I'll grade it by hand. But I'm really, in the world where we are entering multiple deliverables and multiple formats, where we are going to Rec 709 and everything else, when it is not going to broadcast, I'm trying to get myself in the workflow of working in a way where things can go to multiple formats. And even if something is going to just the web, I'm trying to make myself used to working with color management. And color space transform is a very basic form of color management. It's using DaVinci Resolve it's using Resolve's color management in a very basic form. It's not using the entire color management, but I'm using essentially my own custom built color management. And once we start getting into the place where HDR is much more common, stuff like that's going to be really, really crucial. I don't usually work in an sRGB workspace unless that is a really, really specific deliverable. Usually what I'll do is I'll work in Gamma 2.4, Rec 709 up until the very, very end. And if there's a web deliverable, I'll create a LUT, or color space transform conversion to sRGB Gamma 2.2 at the very end for a web deliverable if it's needed. But for the project, I will almost always keep it in Gamma 2.4 the whole way through.
I'm going to throw a question out there because we get this question a lot from folks. And I'm not trying to throw you on the spot here. So if you are not prepared to possibly show this or talk about this, whatever, that's totally fine. But we get a lot of folks that ask about using color charts. And I know Resolve has the ability to, like with the X-Rite chart, to lock on and do all that kind of stuff. What's your thought on those? Do you have an easy system for using those? What's your thought?
This is one of those, like, in theory and in practice thing. I want to say I have used them a handful of times on projects, not because they don't necessarily work, but because, like, I'm sure like you, like, have I seen slates on every single shot that I can read the slate all the time? Never. Like, so the fact is, for a color chart to work as it's intended to, it needs to be properly exposed, needs to be lit, it needs to not be too much smoke. There needs to be a lot of things happening. It needs to be consistently happening. And the world it just doesn't happen that way. So most of the time, what I'll find, yeah, we shot the camera test, we shot the chart, I shot the first shot of the day, I shot the chart. Where's the rest of them? I didn't shoot the chart anymore. We had to go. And so it's sort of helpful for a couple minutes, but most of the time it's useful to take a look at it. Did you guys do anything special? Did you do anything special with the camera? No. Is there anything special? So I'm trying to figure out why they're doing a color chart. For instance, if you're using a camera I've never seen before, I've never worked with before, I have no idea how to transform it, maybe I'll do with that before. I certainly would be interested in it, but if it's a camera that I have a conversion for, especially a mathematical non-LUT-based conversion, it's something that I have time to test with. You're decently exposing all the shots and it's not totally all over the place. I'm probably going to have to work more with the color charts than I will just doing it on my own. Now, that's not to say they're not good. They're certainly good when they're used in practice. And for somebody that doesn't, if I was shooting my own stuff and I wanted to do it all the time, I would probably certainly try and use a color chart. But I mean, I know that I would be probably pretty OCD about that. Most of the time, I just don't see them used properly. And half the time when you use it in Resolve, just like with auto color and auto match, things go weird. Things go really funky and you can't adjust it. You have to basically throw it out. Patrick Inhofer over at Mixing Light has done an amazing sort of 3 or 4 episode breakdown of the chart tool in DaVinci Resolve. And one of the interesting things he noticed is he's like, sometimes it's good if you can grade the gamma out of it and then do the color match. And the whole point of that is like, look, you have to put so much work into getting these things to match. Like it's almost worth just grading it. But when I say that, it's also knowing like, oh, I have the ability to grade that too. So I'm saying that with knowing that I'm able to see the issues. Taking one step back, I want to say that and I say this knowing that I am talking about computers doing my job, the auto grading tools in both Premiere and Resolve are pretty slick. And I openly will admit to using them, at least on every job. Like when I have 2 of these shots shot on the same day, same time, and there's something wrong with these 2. I don't know if it's a filter, I don't know if it's a different lens, I don't know if something, and I really need to go. I'll try the auto match.
And talking about the color match?
Yeah. And I want to say that I found the auto and color match, or basically I'm talking about the automatic features, whether it's auto white balance, auto match, color match, they've gotten a lot better. And you can't rely on them just like you can't rely on the color chart. But I also say, don't forget about them. You can definitely pull them out. And another neat trick that this is one of my favorite tricks, is I have a library of DVD stills that I've downloaded that I have in my Dropbox. You can match to those. People are always saying, oh, I have to only match to my own footage. No, you don't. Pull out a Blu-ray still of your favorite movie or the look that you want and make these auto tools try and match to that. Seriously.
It's fun. I did that. So when I was doing a thing for Adobe, I talked about that with color match. And when I was doing my short film, I pulled a clip from AI, the Spielberg film, and used that to create sort of the colorist that I used to sort of show him, I color matched to that still frame from AI, just like you said, pulled it off the DVD and then, dropped it in the timeline, color matched it and sent that to him as a reference. And yeah, it works great. The color matching tool is really an amazing tool.
I think the biggest thing about color grading is you're dealing with multiple issues. And when people get stuck, take a step back and go, what can help me get me partial away there? It's like untangling a rope kind of thing. You have this big knot and you're like, oh, I can't do it. There's this big knot. And it's all about like untangling the little problems. I have this problem. Okay, the balance is a little bit better now. Color match helped me get the whites white again. Okay, it's a little bit milky. Now what can I do to get the blacks black again? And when you don't look at it as this big, massive pile of rope, it's not as big of a deal. All of a sudden you can deal with these problems again. And then you solve that problem again. Oh, you can save that as a preset. Oh, it's the same preset, the same problem over and over again. Oh yeah, they have one camera with a dead pixel. I can solve it once and do the same fix over on every single shot. You start to notice that all of a sudden they're not that bad. And then you start to notice you've seen the same problem in different films over and over again. And all of a sudden you start to become confident.
One thing I'll ask you guys, if you have any more questions, we'll wrap it up here in a few minutes, but we still have time for questions if you want to get anything in. One thing, just since this group is mostly editors, when you have an editor that's going to send you a project for color grading, what are some things that you look for that you want the editor to know that help you do your job better when they're sending you the project?
I actually have a checklist of things that I try and have editors do, and I'd be happy to share that with the group. It's pretty simple though. Basically, I'm requesting you guys to let me see. These are all simplified. So essentially, what we're trying to do is to minimize problems. It goes back to color grading. And anytime you're going between applications, I don't care if it's Premiere and Resolve or Avid and Resolve or Final Cut 10 and Resolve or anything, we're trying to simplify the differences between the programs. So effects, speed changes, transitions, all this stuff is going to be a little bit different. So minimize the amount of tracks, try and burn in. And one of the things is communication with the colorist. Everybody's going to have a different workflow, but one of the things that you're going to find universal is the simplification of the timeline. Nobody wants clips that are not going to be there, that you were trying out, nested sequences or multi-clam clips. Burn those down, simplify those down, decompose them, whatever the application word of choice is, make it a single clip, please. Because the colorist or finishing artist is going to have to go in there and make that a single clip. This is before the XML export. The easy, think of it like an editor, the way that you would want to open a project that you've never seen before. Make it nice and organized. Make it so it's easy to find the sequence that's for, like one of my favorite things that editors do is when they make the sequence and then they label it _for color. I'm like, thank you. There's 20 different sequences in here and I know which one's for mine. Like, how bad is it when you open up the wrong sequence? It's like, that's the wrong version, man. I'm like, I just spent 20 hours conforming it. Are you joking me?
It happens.
It's totally happened before. So communication also, if there's proxies, one of the things that I've noticed disappearing is, and I can't believe this, a reference movie with burn-ins of the time code and the clip name. It is a lifesaver. Every once in a while, when my job as a colorist is to match frame by frame. I have to do that. I cannot turn over a film or a project that is not frame matched. And so every once in a while, I have to match with the reference movie. And so I'm going to use that as the Bibles. And if you don't give me that, I don't have anything to do. So just giving me the project and giving me your media and calling it a day because it looked good in your computer is not good enough. I need that reference movie, and ideally not an H.264. Send it to me as a DNX or ProRes LT. I need every single frame. And for people that aren't familiar with that is the way H.264 and H.265 encode, they don't give us every single frame unless it's known as iframe. It might encode this frame, and then 10 frames later you'll get a frame, and then 10 frames later. So when you're editing, I can't literally see, that transition or that fade or that speed ramp. I can't go frame for frame for frame. When you have something like ProRes or DNX, even the lower quality ones, I can see frame for frame for frame and match that perfectly. And when you're at, you guys know, midnight, 12:30 at night, when you're just trying to match that one speed ramp to render this thing out, those things are super, super helpful. I think that's probably it. All
right. Yep. Any last questions? Oh, let's see. There is one in the Q&A pod here. Hold on one second. Come on, Nate. You've already exhausted all your questions.
I will. I have to give out one shout out though, because I took his training earlier. I think it was last week. The weeks are going by. Twain Richardson, man. If you need to step up your editing and DaVinci Resolve, Twain has been giving some fantastic presentations. While I really do know the color page of Resolve, the editorial page has become both editorial and media management and DIT has become its whole another ball game, and it's too much for one person to know everything. And Twain has done an absolutely fabulous job of putting together, I think it's like an hour and a half tutorial, and I went through it last week and I was just blown away. So if you have any questions about the editorial features or functionality of Resolve, I highly recommend you reach out to him.
Yeah, I know. I need to do that. I was scheduled to be on that. I think the same one that you were. And then I had to do a presentation for a group here in town that I thought started, DJ and I both did, when I thought it started at 1 o'clock. And so when I got the invite, I'm like, oh, sweet, this works out perfect. I'll do some training in the morning and I'll present in the afternoon. And then the leader of the group called me and said, oh no, since we're doing it online, we're going to do it at 10. I'm like, no. So,
I know.
Anyway, let's see. So Nate had a question here. He says, when you're working with an editor from Premiere, do you ask for an XML, EDL, or AAF? Is there a particular reason you pick one instead of another? I feel like sometimes I have issues round tripping XMLs, and other times I have issues with AAFs. And Nate, you are not asking too many questions, dude. Don't even worry about it.
No, and
he has actually a follow-up, I think, after that. So,
so this question's a really funny one, and it's one that you're gonna laugh at the answer to. I asked for all of them because it's a disaster, and I don't want to wake you up at whatever time to ask for it. So yes, I asked for the project, I asked for an XML, I asked for an AAF, I asked for an EDL. The reason that I do this is I usually, depending on the project, I'm going to try and round trip it. But my favorite technique is known as the scene detect workflow. If you don't need to round trip back to Premiere, and especially if you have a ton of effects, one of the best workflows that you can do is basically a scene detect workflow where you export a single movie with your entire project and then use the EDL, which essentially you can import into Resolve, and it will just essentially cut up the movie for you, and you can start grading. And it's so amazing because the burn-ins are there, the speed ramps are there, everything is burned in. If you're using some weird effects or anything, they're all right there. The only issue for that is if you do weird transforms, if you have a Brady Bunch effect, that's not gonna come over as easily. And then unfortunately you have to immediately finish and resolve. You're not gonna be able to go back to Premiere. But that can save an absolutely tremendous amount of time avoiding a round trip. And I do that all the time if the client has no need for an XML workflow. I don't usually use the AAF round trip that often. I'm usually using an XML round trip. And one of the tip that I will mention is you can wash an XML in Resolve, even if you're not going to be using it, or you can wash an AAF. What I mean by that is you can like run it through Resolve. If, for instance, if you have an XML or AAF that's not working in another program, you can wash it through one application. So I know editors that would take an XML, bring it into Final Cut 7, and then literally just export it, do nothing else, and it would work better in a different application. And it's because all these different applications are speaking with different versions of XML. I believe Resolve is working with, I believe it's like 6.5. Premiere is working with like 7. They're all speaking slightly different versions. It's like English and everybody's speaking European. We can all have slightly different dialects, and all of a sudden when you say one word, it might be a curse version for somebody else, and it might be a hello for somebody else, and it can cause really strange things to happen during the conform. So you can try washing the XML by taking it either through Resolve or Final Cut 10 or Premiere. If you ever have really weird things, literally just export it right out, and it may avoid some of the problems.
You'd think that would be something that Adobe and Blackmagic and Apple and Avid would all sit down together and, like the United Nations, and kind of say, okay, let's hammer something out here to where we can all exchange, have some unified format to where we can all, and, XML is probably the closest that I think you probably come. But even then, like you said, they all have their own variations of it, their own dialect, so to speak, and it can cause problems.
They do, and actually people don't, it's the same thing with the whole OpenFX, like the OpenFX plugin library. People don't realize this, like the OpenFX for Resolve is not the same thing as OpenFX for Nuke and OpenFX for everything else. So it's not really open, which is really funny. So it's the whole point of these things is supposed to make things transfer easily, but just like color charts, just like everything else, there's technically and then there's in practice, and knowing what they are on both sides is important.
Let's see. So we have one other question here. So speaking of DNX and ProRes, people have always said that ProRes is more reliable and likely to have color shifts than DNX. Have you found that to be true, or has DNX been solid for you?
Wait, you're saying people are fanboying the Apple product?
Less likely, I guess.
Wait, read that one more time. I just want to make sure that I understand.
Hold on, let me find it back here. Okay. So let's see. Speaking of DNX and ProRes, people have always said that ProRes is more reliable and less likely to have color shifts than DNX. Have you found that to be true, or has DNX been solid for you?
I have had DNX be quite solid for me. What I think probably represents that is the fact that Apple's video pipeline is much easier to grasp for most people. Most people have QuickTime. Most people open things up in QuickTime, and people that have a Mac render in ProRes. And that's not the same thing with PC. It's really difficult. There's Windows Media Player. What do you play it in? What is the official player for Windows? There's no such thing as an official player for Windows. When people ask me, what do I play my videos in? Unofficially, it's VLC. Officially, it's Telestream Switch. because I just have trouble finding a video player that I can trust other than the Resolve or Adobe Premiere. And that's an OS thing, but I don't think it's actually a codec or a container issue. I think that's much more of an operating system misnomer than anything else. I actually have been using Avid all the time. I also think the MOV container is much more likely to cause color shifts between Windows and Mac than the MXF. So if you do have problems with either one of them, you're much less likely to have problems if you export either one of them to an MXF container. You can keep the same encoding, ProRes or Avid, I don't care, DNxHR or HD, but you can choose the MXF container instead of the MOV container.
Cineform or ProRes?
That's so funny. I'm a huge Cineform fan. I've been using it for years, but I have to say that I have been using ProRes ever since it came into the Adobe spectrum. Don't fight it. It's the easiest. Most people accept it.
All right. All right, guys. Any last questions before we sign off here? Give you just a few seconds here in case anybody's typing anything.
Yeah. Well, everybody's typing. Thank you so much for having me, guys. It's been truly a pleasure.
Dude, I can't thank you enough, and I'm sure DJ feels the same way.
You did awesome, man.
Yeah, having you here was an amazing experience. You did a phenomenal job. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
And thank you, everybody, for showing up and sticking through this.
And if anybody on there has any questions, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. You can find me at jbowdacious, JBOWDACIOUS, or you can email me at jason@pixeltoolspost.com, and I'd be happy to answer any further questions or just chat about color. I always like to pass along the knowledge.
I'll vouch that he is on Twitter all the time, so because we tweet each other, quite a bit. So yeah. All right, so that is it. We will see everybody next month. I think next month we have a speaker that may be presenting. We need to confirm with her. Should be a really cool topic, but if not, then we have a backup topic, and we will be most likely talking about productions in Premiere, the new that new system, or the new way to create your projects and work.
Huge update. Yeah,
big update. If you haven't done it updated yet, you should. And also, I should mention, too, that Adobe is opening up a public beta for Premiere and After Effects and things like that. If you haven't taken part in that, I would highly suggest checking that out as well. That's a really cool way to sort of give your feedback on Premiere and everything going on with that. So with that, we will sign off. And yeah, everybody have a good night.
Have a good one, guys. Stay safe.